Welcome to this video then on Gerald Croft, the Inspector Calls question on your GCSE English Literature exam for the summer. We know it's the toughest question because there's a choice of questions but no extract. We need to choose the question that we think we feel the most confident about. We need to know some quotes because otherwise we'll struggle to get to the grade 5 point on the mark scheme. So the purpose of this video, three things again. Number one, some revision of Gerald Croft as a character. Number two, knowing some key quotes, and I'll give you my top three. And thirdly, how to structure an answer that might help us to hit grade 5 on the mark scheme. So, who is Gerald Croft? He's the son of wealthy upper-class parents and is engaged to Sheila Berlin. Mr. Berlin is delighted with this match as it propels him up the ladder of society. Gerald is the only character who kind of sits on the fence in the play. We've got Mr. and Mrs. Berlin who completely don't take responsibility. We've got Eric and Sheila who do, and Gerald sits somewhere in the middle. He accepts his responsibility and feels terrible about his involvement in Eva's death, but when he discovers that the inspector isn't real, he resumes his capitalist behaviour, but goes back to his capitalist ways, and he's overjoyed that he got away with it. So he kind of sits in the middle. He's described by Priestley in the stage directions as being an attractive chap around 30. So again, his age positions him to be in that position as well. The older generation at that end, the younger generation at that end in their 20s, but Gerald is in his 30s. He's in the middle. He's one of the hardest to reach characters in terms of teaching a lesson because he's actually stuck between two ways of life. He's also described as being too manly to be a dandy, but very much the well-bred young man about town. Well-bred is an important little phrase in there, which tells us a lot about his parentage and the fact that he's been born into a privileged lifestyle. So my top three quotes then, number one is this: as I'm rather more upset by this business. He also later says suicide business, and gave me a glance that was nothing more than a cry for help. I've merged a few quotes into one there. They all come from the same section of text. In these couple of quotes, Gerald is genuinely affected by the death of Eva. He clearly cared for her, but it doesn't excuse the fact that he had an affair and abandoned her when she needed him the most. The use of the word business is a really important word here. Does this undermine what he says? He previously described a positive and loving relationship in which he says he cared for her and looked after her, ensuring that she had money and accommodation. But referring to his relationship with her as a business suggests something more clinical, perhaps can infer a lack of love. Was she just another conquest? A woman he could exert power over and take advantage of on a sexual level. That use of the word business is really, really important. It also shows how much she depended on him, gave him a look, nothing more than a cry for help, as though he's this knight in shining armour, a superhero there to protect her. My second quote is this one: everything's all right now, Sheila. What about this ring? This is an interrogative. It's a question. It's just a fancy word for a question. It might impress the examiner if we use that instead. The audience can be disappointed here. Gerald had learned something and had appeared genuinely remorseful. We actually started to like Gerald despite the fact that he committed adultery. The audience, or had an affair at least, the audience see here, however, that he's happy to have gotten away with it. This is perfectly shown in Priestley's use of the interrogative. He thinks that he can go back to normal. Despite being of the younger generation, he doesn't change like Sheila does, and she cannot see past this. The fact that he thinks he can get engaged again and give her the ring back now that the inspector's not real is really significant. My third quote is this one: after all, we're respectable citizens and not criminals. Priestley suggests here that the Berlings and Gerald don't consider themselves criminals, but have in fact helped to kill Eva Smith. Eva represents the working class and the Berlings represent the audience and society's affluent people. Bearing in mind that to go to the theatre would have been quite expensive, Priestley knew that the people in the audience would be largely capitalist. Priestley uses this line to impact on the audience and for them to see the stage almost like a mirror, so that they can learn from what they're seeing. It's also somewhat ironic and paradoxical, meaning that it doesn't make sense what he's saying. He's saying they're respectable citizens and not criminals. They aren't actually respectable though, and we could argue that what they did was criminal. Maybe not in the eyes of the law, but certainly in the eyes of a socialist society. So how might this look as a grade 5 paragraph then in terms of Gerald being an important character? Again, we're sticking to what, how, why, and trying to squeeze as much out of each quote as we can rather than use lots of different quotes. The what then? Gerald is an integral character in the play because he's the only character who we could argue sits on the fence. He learns a lesson through his interrogation and seems genuinely upset. When he discovers that the inspector was potentially a fake though, he goes back on this and is delighted that he got away with it. He sits in the middle. The how is our evidence. We see this when he initially declares that he's rather more upset by this business. Through the use of the declarative sentence here, showing that he declares something. We see that Gerald is genuinely affected by the death of Eva. He clearly cared for her. The use of the word business, though, is significant. Does this undermine what he says? He previously described a positive and loving relationship in which he cared for her and looked after her, making sure she had money and accommodation. Referring to his relationship with her as a business suggests something much more clinical and in fact infers a lack of love. Was this just another conquest for him? By later asking Sheila if she wants to get back engaged tells us everything we need to know about Gerald and the fact that he hasn't really learnt a fat lot. So what I would do now is have a go at using one of the other quotes to form a paragraph in that way. There are resources online, mrcrawfordenglish.com/revision, and you can follow my Instagram as well, Mr Crawford ENG, for daily tips and revision for all of the texts, language and literature in the build-up to the exams. Laters.